The Nissan Sylvia is a slow car. Frankly, it's not a very nice car to be in. And if you try to find one for sale that isn't clapped beyond recognition, well, you're gonna be sorely disappointed. By all accounts, the Nissan S chassis is a piece of junk. Yet somehow, it became a legend of the car world. It became the grassroots hero, the drift missile, the blank canvas waiting in your garage. For an entire generation, the S chassis became the car that turned kids into tuners, tuners into drivers, and drivers into legends. But how did a cheap Japanese jalopy manage to do all of that? Well, it was thanks to 5 specific things that by themselves don't really mean much, but together they turned the S chassis into a car that changed the automotive world forever. But first, we have to start with some background. I've been saying Nissan S chassis, but we need to start with its other name, Sylvia. Sylvia came from Roman mythology. It was the goddess of the forest, a fitting title for a car that would one day echo through Japan's mountain passes, but that was a happy accident because initially, the Sylvia wasn't built to drift or to race, it was built to impress. The year was 1964 and Nissan had just unveiled the Datsun Coupe 1500 at the Tokyo Motor Show. That car came out to be later known as the CSP 311, aka the first true Sylvia. It shared its bones with the Fairlady, but this wasn't just a rebadge. It cost nearly double the price because each Sylvia was semi-hand-built on a jig with the help of the master craftsmen over at Yamaha. The car looked European because, well, it kinda was. Japanese car designer Kazuo Kimura worked alongside Albert von Goetz, the German-American behind many cars from BMWs and later the Toyota 2000 GT. And this CSP 311 wasn't a commuter car, it was Japan's first sports coupe with style and speed to match. In fact, it was the fastest car in the entire country with a top speed of 103 miles per hour. So fast that 2 were sent to Tokyo's police department to become Japan's first ever highway patrol car, which is great marketing and all, but the CSP 311 never really sold. To the average Japanese citizen, it was far too boutique of a car, too expensive, and frankly, way too ahead of its time. People wanted cars they could afford and could get them from A to B. They didn't need some fancy overpriced specialty car. And so, the Nissan CSP 311 was a flop. But even in its failure, it planted a seed. The seed of a lightweight, rear-wheel drive sports car from Nissan. So Nissan followed it up with the Sylvia S10. And unlike the one before it, this car was mass-produced on Nissan's all-new S chassis platform. And instead of being a high-end 2-seater like the previous car, this one was considered an everyday enthusiast car. Not quite a boring daily, but much more affordable than the old CSP 311. And that brings me to the first ingredient that made the Sylvia a worldwide legend. It was cheap. There were plenty of fancy sports cars that let you feel that driving thrill, but you had to pay to play. And Nissan realized that affordability had to be priority number 1 if the Sylvia was to be successful. So to make the S10 as cheap as they could, they had to make some compromises. It was originally designed to be powered by a rotary engine after seeing Mazda's success, but this car was developed right alongside the oil crisis, so rotary plans were scrapped for the L18, a 1.8-liter inline-4. I can only imagine what would have happened if we had 2 rotary-powered Japanese coupes. We'd probably all be driving rotary spaceships by now. Either that or we all would have suffocated to death in the 80s because of the smog. Anyways, the official name of the S10 in Japan was the new Sylvia, but in America, we got it as the Datsun 200SX, and that was thanks to the larger 2-liter engine that the US market got. And well, it was a pretty great car. What it lacked in power, it made up for in fun, especially thanks to its 2,200-pound curb weight, but there was a problem, and that problem was called the Toyota Celica, which was basically a better car in every single way and much prettier to boot. So the Nissan S10 was doomed to live in the Celica's shadow, but that just meant that Nissan was going to have to push the envelope with the next Sylvia. Enter the S110. If you're wondering why they didn't call it the S11, I have no idea, but this was very much the next evolution of the S chassis. The headline was now a fuel-injected engine and some minor cosmetic tweaks, but what was most important about this S110 was that Nissan began experimenting. They threw a turbo at it for the first time ever, and a new head with dual overhead cams that pushed this car all the way up to 135 horsepower, which was a big jump from back when it only had 90. And then they introduced the S110 240 RS. In the Nissan world, 240 means one thing. This car was powered by a 2.4 liter engine. In this case, it was the FJ24 engine, and this thing was badass. Only 200 were made, and they all made 240 horsepower. This car was so great that it became Nissan's chance at putting the S chassis on the world stage. It was Nissan's official rally entry into WRC, and it was the foundation for the Nissan S110 Super Silhouette. What's Super Silhouette? Well, it was an amazing, no-holds-barred racing series that frankly deserves a video of its own. But for the sake of this story, that didn't really matter, because just like the first Sylvia, the S110 didn't sell very well either. In fact, the entire S110 lineup had the second shortest lifespan in the entire S chassis history, but all of that was going to finally change with the release of the 1984 Sylvia S12, a car that at the time was innovative with its wedge-type silhouette and pop-up headlights available in both a coupe or a hatchback. That's a joke, if you didn't get the sarcasm. I just described every single JDM car in the 80s. But while the S12 wasn't super unique in the way it looked, the important thing was that Nissan was continually refining the S chassis to be more affordable, better to drive, and more in line with its competitors. And well, Nissan was having fun doing it too. They had an RSX turbo variant that shared an engine with the Skyline Turbo, giving it genuine performance appeal, and in America we got it as the 200SX, thanks to the NA 2-liter 4-banger that we got here. And well, the S12 battled against the likes of the Toyota AE86 and Honda's Prelude, and on the spec sheet it had more power, it was more comfortable, many said it was more refined, but it still never really caught on with the enthusiast crowd. The other options on the market were just more enjoyable and more relatable to enthusiasts. 3 generations of Sylvia in, and Nissan still couldn't make a car that was as fun or as exciting as what Honda or Toyota were making. So the engineers at Nissan really focused in. The formula needed affordability, yes, but beyond that, the car needed to be so connected, so enjoyable to drive that any enthusiast would leave the driver's seat with a permanent smile on their face. Lucky for Nissan, the late 80s saw Japan's economy boom, paving the way for a generation of car lovers hungry for affordable, fun cars. And so, Nissan answered with the Sylvia S13. And unlike any S chassis before it, this was an instant hit. Out the gate, the S13 won Japan's Car of the Year award in 1989 and was praised for its styling, handling, and affordable performance. It had multi-link independent suspension, high-cast 4-wheel steering, and a factory viscous type LSD option, which made it the perfect recipe for a tail-happy but controllable chassis. It was essentially drift-ready from day one. And that was the second ingredient of the 5, a fun, approachable, lively chassis. One that could both teach an absolute amateur on how to rotate and balance a slide, while also being so good that a professional driver could sharpen their skills on it too. Nissan engineered the S chassis into one of the best foundations for car enthusiasts to grow with. But that is where Nissan's contribution sort of stopped, because ingredients 3, 4, and 5 kinda had nothing to do with Nissan at all. But we'll get to that later. Paired with its lively chassis, the S13 also came with trims that enthusiasts could really live with. In Japan, you had 3 models to choose from, the Ks, Qs, and the Js, named after their respective playing cards, Jack, Queen, King. The cheapest was the Js, which came with limited options, a basic interior, 14-inch steelies. Then the Sylvia Qs was the middle-of-the-pack trim that came with plenty of electronic options plus the optional viscous LSD. And both the J and the Q were powered by the 133 horsepower, 1.8-liter naturally aspirated CA18DE 4-cylinder engine. And then there was the Sylvia Ks, the king Every upgrade you could get on the Qs came standard on the Ks, but now this one had a turbo CA18 DET, making a very healthy 173 horsepower. But you see, there was one more trim. A secret Sylvia, if you will. You see, at the same time that the S13 Sylvias existed, Nissan Japan was selling another car that lived on the same platform, but it wasn't called a Sylvia. In fact, Nissan dealerships weren't even allowed to have them next to each other on the showroom floors. It was called the 180SX. You see, the Sylvias were priced much higher, so they were sold at dealerships along with the Skyline. Meanwhile, the 180SX could only be sold in dealerships that had the Fair Lady Z as the center of attention. And from the outside, the main difference was that, well, the Sylvia J's, Q's, and K's, those were the coupes, the boring old fixed headlight cars. But you know what's better than fixed headlights? Pop-ups. And you know what's better than pop-ups? The 1/8 scale Fast and Furious Supra from our sponsor, Fanhome. If you love JDM cars, then you'll love Fanhome's movie-accurate model of Brian O'Connor's legendary Supra Turbo from the first Fast film. It's made with die-cast metal, has a fully illuminated dashboard and interior lights, complete with 2JZ engine and horn sounds, and even a NOS bottle in the trunk. And with Fanhome's subscription, you get new pieces to assemble every month straight to your door. And this isn't your average car model. The detail of the interior stitching, the Sparco steering wheel, the ultra high quality construction, this is a recreation of a JDM movie icon. An icon that'll be right at home on your desk or as a trophy in the garage. So use code ALBONSUPRA and get your own at the link below and start your collection with Fanhome. Now, back in Nissan land, the 180SX launched alongside the S13 Sylvia Coupe, but it was the hatchback variant that looked slightly different to appeal to a more entry-level market. And while to many it was just the cheaper variant of the S chassis, it quickly became something greater. It was the original Drift Missile starter pack. Under the hood, at first at least, you only had one option, and it was a turbo. That same CA18 DET from the Sylvia case. 1.8 liter, hence the name 180SX, but later that didn't really make sense because Nissan stopped making these with the 1.8 and replaced them all with the 2-liter SR20 turbo engines that made a very respectable 202 horsepower. But power alone wasn't why the 180SX earned its cult status. This car resonated with enthusiasts because it was affordable, practical, and endlessly versatile. You could daily drive it during the week and then drift it or race it at weekend grassroots events. And it was a hatchback, so all your tires and tools for a track day would fit right in. Now, around this point in the 90s, the drifting community was new and growing, and the 180SX became the face of that movement. And if the Sylvia was the clean-cut, refined choice, then the 180SX was the scrappy underdog. You weren't afraid to break, fix, and then break again. There was nothing a few zip ties couldn't fix. And even visually, the 180SX set trends. Combine the popular hatchback body style with the crazy body kit culture in Japan, and you got a car that was not only iconic of all things JDM, but was also endlessly customizable. And I should point out that I'm not talking about just in Japan either. In the US, we got the hatchback as the 240SX because of the 2.4 liter KA24 4-cylinder that came in place of the SR and also wasn't very good. And just like in Japan, it came at a very accessible price. But here's the thing. Drifting is kind of an expensive sport. It definitely has a lower barrier to entry, sure, but you're ripping through tires, you're destroying bumpers, bumping quarter panels into tire walls and other drifters even, and well, drifting might have remained a niche, unreachable hobby for most people if it wasn't for the third of our 5 big ingredients, the absolutely massive aftermarket parts industry. If Sylvia owners had to buy OEM parts every time they broke something, they all would have gone bankrupt after the second drift day. But the 1990s saw an explosion of affordable third-party body panels, engine parts, wheel suspensions, seats, and safety equipment. And it was thanks to this endless aftermarket that the S chassis was basically disposable, and I mean that in a good way. Nissan made so many S13s that by the time the early 2000s rolled around, you could buy a used beat up S13 for a couple $1,000, modify the diff, throw in some springs, and just have a blast sliding it. The JDM hero cars like the Supras and Skylines were just too expensive, too precious, or too rare to take these risks with. A dented up Sylvia was a lovable beater that encouraged you to push harder. Just like in Japan, the S13 became the backbone of drift events stateside. And it was this democratization of hooning that earned the S chassis its grassroots hero status. Now, lucky for us, things didn't end with the S13 because Nissan wasn't done, not even close. And at the end of 1993, Nissan introduced the S14. And if the S13 was the spark of an automotive revolution, then the S14 was the fuel poured on the fire. The style evolved significantly. The car was longer, sleeker, and the pop-ups were sadly gone. And unfortunately, the hatch was gone too, as well as the convertible. Oh yeah, there was a convertible S13 for the guys that love the smell of tire smoke, I guess. Now, mechanically, the S14 wasn't as groundbreaking as that first S13, but everything was still what enthusiasts wanted. In Japan, the engine options were the same, the SR20, NA, or with a turbo, but now the engine had variable valve timing, pushing the turbo trim to a very respectable 220 horsepower. In America, the car was once again called the 240SX due to its lackluster KA24 that made 155 horsepower. But here's the thing. Even though Nissan was just trying to refine the recipe of the last gen, which was very successful, enthusiasts were slow to accept the new offering. The S14 wasn't universally praised out the gate like the S13 was. Nissan softened the edgy design, the car was slightly heavier, and prices were a bit higher. Add to that the lack of a turbo in the States or even an SR20, and well, all that meant was that people started to just search more for used S13s. Which is kind of funny because the S13 wasn't even canceled in Japan. Nissan kept making the 180SXs until 1998 because it was so popular. And that popularity of the last gen car led to them making even cooler models of it in Japan. The S14 may have been the new car on the block, but Nissan still developed the 180SX Type X, a fully kitted out version of the hatchback S13 with a full aero kit, wheels, and LSD, and of course the SR20 DET. Now, that's not to say the S14 didn't get some cool models too, like the Nismo 270R, a limited edition model to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of Nismo, Nissan's in-house motorsports program. 270, of course, was the amount of horsepower they were able to squeeze out of the built SR20 that came in it. And well, that was really it. Other than that, the S14 series was kinda lackluster. But here's where it gets interesting, because the S14 being kinda mid was the reason it became an icon. You see, its initial lukewarm reception made it perfect for enthusiasts to buy secondhand cheaply. And by the early 2000s, the S14 became the definitive second chance hero. The aftermarket still made a ton of parts for the S14 because, well, it shared a lot of parts with the S13, and combine that with the relatively cheap used car prices, and young tuners found the S14 offered something special. It was more structurally rigid and sophisticated than the S13, which meant that it could handle big power builds, wider wheels, aggressive drifting setups with ease compared to the S13, and companies like HKS, Cusco, Blitz, and Greddy provided endless tuning options. Engine swaps became even easier, with many S14s seeing RB engines or even heavily modified SR20s, which eventually led to bigger conversions like JZs and LSs. And well, in drifting circles, the S14 became legendary. It quickly rose to dominate grassroots events and early professional drifting circuits worldwide, becoming a staple car in the early years of Formula Drift and Japan's D1 Grand Prix. And well, that brings me to ingredient number 4, timing. The S14 Sylvia was in the right place at the right time. And even though Nissan didn't really get to see the benefit of sales, the timing of cheap secondhand Sylvias, along with the exploding aftermarket and the rise in drifting culture, meant that this car was going to become the de facto choice for people who loved to slide cars. It may have been less raw than the S13 that came before it, and it may have been less iconic than the S15 that came next, but for a huge number of car enthusiasts, the S14 was the perfect happy middle ground. A happy middle ground that bridged the gap to the ultimate Sylvia, the S15. Just like John Wick 4, every legend needs a finale. And for the S chassis, the grand conclusion was the Nissan Sylvia S15, the brilliant sunset of the S-chassis golden age, one that enthusiasts in America admired only from afar. Because, well, the car was introduced in 1999 and it was, save for the Kiwis and Aussies, Japan only. It was now making 250 horsepower with the help of Nissan's best SR20 yet, thanks to a new ball-bearing turbo. And the styling was aggressive from every angle, both inside and out, sporty yet beautiful. In my opinion, one of Nissan's best-looking modern cars. And Nissan made it simple for buyers by offering only two options, the Spec S and the Spec R. The Spec R was the top trim. It had the turbo, a 6-speed manual or 4-speed auto if you were so inclined, suspension upgrades like bigger anti-roll bars and strut bracing, and larger front brakes from the 300ZX. The Spec S was the base model, no turbo, 5-speed manual option, and 2-piston brakes instead of 4. The LSD was optional, a proper stripper spec. And well, in Japan, the car became a tuner's delight, and eventually a staple of every drift competition. Just look at a list of the most winningest platforms. The very first D1 Grand Prix champion, Noob, drove one of the most famous drift cars ever, his S15 built by HKS. And then there's Ryuji Miki, a name that may sound less familiar, but his car certainly isn't. The top secret S15, with a 530 horsepower SR20 engine stroked out to 2.2 liters in a complete race-ready package that weighed just over 2,500 pounds. It was an absolute drift missile, especially for 2004 standards. And those are just two of the dozens of famous S15s that competed all over Japan. But for enthusiasts elsewhere, especially in the US, the S15 was forbidden fruit. Nissan never exported it to North America or Europe, and Australia and New Zealand only got a handful labeled as 200SX that were detuned severely to meet emissions regulations. And well, because of that, an entire generation of American gearheads grew up in the 2000s seeing the S15 only in video games, import magazines, Fast and Furious movies, but never in the flesh. The closest we ever got was watching Sean wreck the Mona Lisa of the drift world. It was this scarcity that made the S15 so coveted. Alongside the GTR, the S15 attained this unicorn status among JDM fans in the West. And for 25 long years, we could only dream of that car, unless of course we had some gray market connections. And while we waited for that time to pass here in the West, the guys in Japan were fully embracing this new generation of S-chassis. Tuners pushed the engine past 400 horsepower for time attack builds at Tsukuba, wide body kits were developed for meets at Daikoku, and angle kits were installed for sliding at Ebisu. And in the pro drifting world, drivers like James Dean were winning 3-peats in the USA competing in Formula Drift. His weapon of choice? A 2JZ powered S15. And even though it wasn't an SR20 and was very far from being the original S15 and everywhere else, that car's prowess was proven on the American stage, while American fans still had to just admire from the sidelines. That is, until 2024, when the floodgates finally opened. The oldest S15s, built in 1999, turned 25 years old, meaning they could finally be legally imported into the US under the classic car exemption. And overnight, that long pent-up demand exploded. Importers were scrambling to source clean S15s from Japan, and prices surged accordingly. A clean, low-mileage Spec R S15 often commands $30,000 to $40,000 US when it's all said and done, which is an insane price for a 90s 2-liter Nissan, especially one that was built to be an affordable entry-level sports car. But that doesn't matter, because for many enthusiasts, it's well worth the price. It was the attainable JDM apple of Eden, the orange of Eden, let's call it. And car meets across America are just beginning to see these sleek Nissan coupes roll into a parking lot near them. And well, personally, I'm not a massive Nissan fanboy, you guys know that, but with the S15, there's a sense of a hero's welcome. The S-chassis has forever been the Japanese weapon of choice, and now it's getting a new 21st century spotlight. And part of that modern resurgence is fueled by social media and YouTube car culture. Influencers and content creators wasted no time in snatching up S15s to showcase. Adam LZ's OG Formula Drift car, Jimmy Oaks has like 40 of them. Hell, even Doug got his hands on one to dissect its quirks and features. Instagram and TikTok are ablaze with clips of freshly imported Sylvias and AI voiceovers of wide-body installs and turbo upgrades, and even the aftermarket has a renewed fervor. Companies are reproducing rare aero parts and tuning components to cater to this new wave of S15 owners. In a way, the S15's US arrival has kind of completed the S-chassis legend. The Sylvia story arc that went from underdog beginnings with the S110 to S12 to cult heroes with the S13 and S14 to a mythic icon with the S15, and now its triumphant return into car culture. Gen Z kids are into JDM. They're putting body kits and neons on their cars. There's a feeling that the era of Japanese car culture has been reborn. And well, the S-chassis is no longer unsung. It's being celebrated worldwide. There is more shared passion for these little Japanese shitboxes than ever before, and day by day that community grows bigger. And there it is, ingredient number 5, community. Among all the late night builds and bloody knuckles, the drift days and car meets, the forum build threads and viral TikToks, there is one thing that is the fabric of this passion of ours, and that is the relationships, the friendships, the waves and thumbs up to the strangers who drive by in that sick S13. It's that feeling of community that keeps this fire burning inside us, and it's what has taken a relatively ordinary car and made it extraordinary. And it's why you should join the Albon Discord, which is linked below the subscribe button. In the end, the Nissan S-chassis became one of the great legends of Japanese car culture, not by outgunning the biggest names on the grid, but by capturing hearts on the streets and late night garage hangouts. And alongside its affordability, its endlessly playful chassis, the robust aftermarket support, and well, its lucky timing, the S-chassis democratized performance. And it gave gearheads an accessible canvas to build their own dream car. The JDM car community owes so much of its soul to cars like the S-chassis. And nearly 40 years on, it brings me so much joy to see that the Sylvia is finally getting its standing ovation. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, then you will absolutely love this video that I handpicked for you right here. Do hit like if you liked the video, and don't forget to subscribe to Albon. I'll see you guys in the next one.